Hi, it's so good to see you here again. Today, we're setting sail into the shadowy corners of 17th century naval history. I hope your day has been great. Mine wasn't the best, but it's already getting better now that you're here. Before you drift off to sleep, do me a little favor. Leave a comment. Where are you trying to fall asleep tonight? What time is it over there? And if you feel like it, subscribing to the channel and leaving a like would really make my day. Now relax, get comfortable, and enjoy our journey. Tonight, we embark on a journey not of discovery or glorious conquest, but of sheer, unrelenting hardship. We're stepping aboard a 17th century whaling ship. Forget the romantic notions of adventure on the high seas. Picture instead a floating factory, an abattoir adrift, crewed by the desperate, the unlucky, and the profoundly unwashed. Prepare yourself, not for excitement, but for a slow, immersive descent into the daily grind, the pervasive stench, and the quiet desperation that defined life for these men. Imagine, if you will, the first sensation as you step onto the deck. It's not the crisp sea air you might expect. No, the dominant smell is an unholy trinity. Stale bilge water, the pervasive greasy reek of rendered whale oil that clings to every surface, and the underlying musk of unwashed bodies crammed into close quarters. The wood beneath your feet is perpetually damp, slick not just with seawater, but with a film of grime and, in certain areas, dried blood and viscera from previous hunts. Look around you. The ship, perhaps a bark or a brig, feels smaller, more claustrophobic than you imagined. Ropes coil like sleeping snakes, thick with tar. The sails overhead, stained and patched, groan as they catch the wind. The horizon stretches endlessly, a vast indifferent expanse of grey-blue water that promises nothing but isolation. You are here now, one of the crew. Perhaps you were pressed into service, snatched from a tavern brawl. Perhaps you signed on willingly, lured by the promise of a share in the profits, a promise that often proved as elusive as a calm sea. Whatever your reason, your reality is now this cramped, stinking vessel. Your companions a motley collection of rough men from various corners of the world, bound together only by shared misery and the captain's iron fist. The sounds are a constant, low-level assault. The rhythmic creaking of the ship's timbers, a sound that will become the soundtrack to your existence, sometimes comforting in its familiarity, sometimes terrifying in its intensity during a storm. The slap of waves against the hull, the sharp cries of orders being barked by the mates, the rough laughter and muttered curses of your fellow sailors, and beneath it all, the subtle, unsettling noises from the hold, the scuttling of rats, the sloshing of stagnant water, the groaning of the ship's structure under strain. These are the sounds that will lull you into an uneasy sleep, if sleep comes at all. Feel the damp chill that seems to permeate everything, even on a relatively mild day. Your clothes, likely coarse wool or canvas, are already starting to feel clammy. The wind whips across the deck, carrying the salty spray that stings your eyes and coats your skin. There is no escape from the elements, no truly dry or warm place to retreat to. Shelter is rudimentary, offering little respite from the cold, the damp, or the sheer discomfort of this existence. This is your world now: wood, water, wind, and the ever-present smell of decay and industry. The glamour is non-existent. The reality is harsh, immediate, and inescapable. Settle in. Let your eyelids grow heavy as we begin to explore the daily horrors, the small struggles, and the overwhelming sucked factor of life aboard this 17th century floating hell. The journey has just begun, and already the prospect of dry land feels like a distant, impossible dream. Let's delve deeper into your physical reality aboard this vessel. Forget any notion of robust health or vitality. The 17th century whaling ship is a breeding ground for ailments, a floating petri dish where diseases flourish with terrifying ease. Your body, from the moment you stepped aboard, began a slow, inexorable battle against a tide of sickness, malnutrition, and injury, with precious little help available. The most insidious and perhaps most famous companion of the long-haul sailor is scurvy. You feel its creeping onset first as a profound weariness, a bone-deep fatigue that no amount of rest can shake. Then comes the tenderness in your gums. They swell, turning a bruised purple, bleeding at the slightest touch. Eating becomes an agony as your teeth loosen in their sockets, threatening to fall out entirely. Old wounds, long healed, might mysteriously reopen, weeping as if fresh. Your joints ache with a dull, persistent throb, and dark, splotchy bruises appear on your skin without any apparent cause. You see it in the faces of your crewmates, the sunken eyes, the pallid skin, the slow, shuffling gait. It's a slow decay, a weakening from within, caused by the simple lack of fresh fruits and vegetables on your monotonous diet of salt beef and hardtack. The cure, citrus, is known to some, but often unavailable or dismissed by captains more concerned with cargo space than crew welfare. But scurvy is just one spectre haunting the cramped confines of the forecastle where you sleep. Syphilis, the great pox, is a common affliction, brought aboard from shore-leave encounters and spreading insidiously through shared utensils or close contact in the unhygienic conditions. You might see the telltale sores, the rashes, the eventual descent into madness or paralysis in some unfortunate souls. Treatments are crude and often more dangerous than the disease itself. Mercury rubs that poison the patient, useless herbal concoctions and whispered prayers. Then there are the fevers. Sudden, inexplicable bouts of intense heat and chills that leave you weak and delirious. Typhus, carried by the lice that inevitably infest your bedding and clothes, is a constant threat. Malaria might have been contracted in a previous port, or it could be any number of undiagnosed infections festering in the unsanitary environment. The ship's surgeon, if you're lucky enough to have one, is likely more butcher than healer. His primary tools are the lancet for bloodletting, a universal cure that often weakens the patient further, and the saw for amputations, performed without anesthetic in conditions ripe for gangrene. His medicinal chest contains dubious purgatives, opium for pain and addiction, and perhaps some foul-smelling ointments. Rum is often prescribed liberally, less as medicine and more as a way to numb the senses or make the patient compliant. And let's not forget the parasites. Worms are an accepted part of life. You feel them sometimes, a sickening squirming in your gut. They thrive on the poor diet and contaminated water. Lice and fleas are your constant bedfellows, burrowing into your scalp and clothing, their bites leaving itchy welts that easily become infected from scratching with dirty fingernails. The bilge water below deck, a stagnant soup of seawater, human waste and rotting refuse, breeds unimaginable bacteria. Any cut or scrape, no matter how minor, is a potential gateway to deadly infection. You learn to watch small wounds with anxiety, praying they don't turn red, swell, and fill with pus. Your senses are constantly assaulted by the evidence of this ill health. The smell of sickness hangs heavy in the air below deck. The metallic tang of blood, the sourness of vomit, the fetid odor of infected wounds, the ammonia stench from buckets used as latrines. You hear the groans of men in pain, the racking coughs, the delirious mutterings. You see the physical toll, the gaunt faces, the jaundiced skin, the missing limbs, the open sores. This isn't an adventure. It's a struggle for survival against an invisible army of microbes and deficiencies, fought with little more than hope and a tolerance for suffering that seems almost inhuman by modern standards. As you try to find some measure of comfort in your damp hammock, the reality sinks in. The greatest danger on this voyage might not be the whales or the sea, but the slow, grinding decay of your own body. Beyond the pervasive sickness, your life is defined by relentless, back-breaking labor. The concept of a standard workday, of weekends, of rest, is utterly alien here. You exist in a cycle of watches, short bursts of exhausting activity, followed by brief, inadequate periods of attempted sleep, often totaling no more than 4 hours in any 24-hour stretch, and frequently much less when the hunt is on. Your day, or rather your watch, might begin hours before dawn. You're roused from your damp hammock, slung precariously in the cramped, fetid forecastle, perhaps directly above barrels of reeking oil or provisions, not by a gentle alarm, but by a rough shake or a bellowed command. There's no time for easing into the day. You stumble out, pulling on the same stiff, salt-encrusted clothes from the day before, maybe grabbing a swig of stale water or a piece of dry, likely weevil-infested hardtack if you're lucky. Then it's onto the deck, into the pre-dawn chill or the oppressive midday heat, depending on your watch. The work is constant and varied, but always demanding. You might be ordered aloft, climbing the swaying rigging, your bare feet and calloused hands finding precarious purchase on tarred ropes. High above the deck, with the ship pitching and rolling beneath you, you scan the vast ocean for the telltale spout of a whale, your eyes straining against the glare or the gloom. The wind threatens to tear you from your perch. A moment's inattention could mean a fatal plunge to the deck or into the unforgiving sea below. Or perhaps you're on deck duty, swabbing the already filthy planks, trying futilely to scrub away the ingrained grime and oil, mending torn sails with thick needles and rough thread, your fingers growing raw, coiling heavy ropes, the friction burning your palms, turning the capstan to raise the anchor or hoist heavy barrels, straining alongside your crewmates, muscles screaming in protest. Maintaining the ship requires endless vigilance, checking for leaks, tightening rigging, patching wood, ensuring the precious whaleboats are ready for immediate launch. And then there's the hunt itself. The cry of "Thar she blows" galvanizes the ship into frantic action. All semblance of rest vanishes. You scramble into the whaleboats, small, fragile crafts that look wholly inadequate for challenging a creature the size of your ship. You row furiously, pulling on the heavy oars, your back and shoulders burning, urged on by the shouts of the mate. The chase can last for hours, under a blazing sun or through choppy waves, until you're close enough for the harpooner to make his strike. If the harpoon finds its mark, the real danger begins. The wounded whale might dive, pulling the boat along at terrifying speed in a Nantucket sleigh ride, or it might turn and attack, smashing the boat to splinters with a flick of its massive tail. You're constantly bailing water, avoiding flailing flukes, trying not to get tangled in the flying harpoon line that could sever a limb or drag you overboard into the icy depths. Even when the whale is killed, the work is far from over. Towing the colossal carcass back to the ship is another feat of endurance. And then begins the gruesome process of cutting in and trying out, which we will explore later. But suffice it to say, it involves long hours handling enormous, razor-sharp cutting spades on a deck made treacherous by blood and oil, wrestling with immense chunks of blubber and bone. There is no respite. You work until you're numb with exhaustion, your body aching, your hands blistered and bleeding. You eat standing up, quickly gulping down whatever meager, unappetizing fare is offered. You collapse into your hammock when your watch finally ends, falling into a heavy, dreamless stupor, only to be violently awakened a few short hours later to begin the cycle anew. Sleep is not rest, it's merely a brief pause in the relentless grind. This is the rhythm of your life: strain, exhaustion, danger, repeat. The sheer physical toll is immense, aging you prematurely, grinding down your body and spirit with its brutal, unending demands. Beyond the physical hardships of disease and relentless labor, there is a deeper, more insidious challenge you face: the profound psychological weight of the open sea. Weeks, sometimes months, pass without the sight of land. The world shrinks to the confines of your rolling, creaking vessel, surrounded by an infinite, indifferent expanse of water and sky. This isolation gnaws at the edges of your sanity, breeding a unique kind of terror, quiet, pervasive, and inescapable. Look out at the horizon. Day after day, it's the same unbroken line where grey water meets grey sky, or perhaps a blinding blue emptiness under the tropical sun. There are no landmarks, no familiar sights, nothing to anchor your sense of place or progress. Time itself seems to warp, stretching into an endless monotony, punctuated only by the changing watches and the occasional frantic violence of the whale hunt. You lose track of days, sometimes weeks. The world beyond the ship begins to feel unreal, a distant memory or a fading dream. Did you truly have a life before this? Family, friends, solid ground beneath your feet. It becomes harder and harder to recall. The sea itself, initially perhaps awe-inspiring, becomes a source of constant, low-level dread. You become acutely aware of how small and fragile your wooden ship is against the immense power of the ocean. In calm weather, the vast stillness can feel oppressive, unnatural. In storms, the fury is terrifying. Mountainous waves crash over the deck, threatening to sweep men overboard in an instant. The wind howls like a banshee through the rigging. The ship groans and shudders under the assault, and you wonder with each sickening lurch if this will be the moment it finally succumbs, plunging you all into the cold, dark depths from which there is no return. Superstition thrives in this isolated environment, fed by fear and uncertainty. Sailors whisper tales of ghost ships sailing silently through the fog, crewed by the damned. They speak of krakens and sea serpents lurking in the abyssal depths, capable of dragging entire vessels down. Certain signs are ill omens: a cormorant landing on the mast, the appearance of St. Elmo's fire dancing in the rigging, a particular pattern of clouds. You find yourself half believing these tales, your rational mind eroded by the constant exposure to the vast unknown and the shared anxieties of the crew. Then there are the sounds, or the lack thereof, the creaking timbers, the slap of water, the wind. These become familiar. But it's the other sounds, the ones that don't belong, that truly unsettle you. A strange moaning carried on the wind at night, unexplained creaks and groans from the cargo hold below, where the darkness feels thick and watchful, the distant, mournful cry of a whale that sounds almost human. And sometimes, the most terrifying thing is the silence, a dead calm where the ship barely moves, the air hangs heavy, and an unnerving sense of being watched settles over the crew. You hear stories too, passed down in hushed tones during the dog watch, tales of ships that sailed out and simply vanished without a trace, swallowed by the sea, leaving no wreckage, no survivors. You think about the vastness surrounding you, the crushing pressure of the depths miles below. How easy it would be for your own ship to disappear, to become just another whispered legend. The thought settles like a cold stone in your gut. This constant, low-grade fear, combined with the isolation and physical hardship, takes its toll. You see men becoming withdrawn, staring blankly at the horizon for hours. Others become jumpy, prone to sudden bursts of anger or paranoia. The lack of external stimuli, the sheer monotony, can be as damaging as any physical threat. The sea is not just an environment. It's a psychological force, pressing in on you, testing the limits of your endurance, threatening to dissolve your sense of self into its vast, uncaring emptiness. You are adrift, not just physically, but mentally, in a world where the only certainty is the endless, rolling blue and the quiet terror it inspires. You might think, given the hardships already described, that the whale itself is merely a passive resource, a giant sack of oil waiting to be harvested. You would be dangerously mistaken. The sperm whale, the primary target of many 17th century voyages, is not a docile creature. It is an intelligent, powerful behemoth, capable of immense destruction, and it does not always yield meekly to the harpoon. Imagine the scene again. You're in the whaleboat, muscles screaming from the chase, salt spray blinding you. The harpooner has struck true. The line snaps taut, singing as it whips out of the tub, threatening to take fingers, hands, or even your entire arm with it if you're careless. But instead of fleeing or diving deep, this whale reacts with fury. It breaches, launching its colossal body almost entirely out of the water. Tons of muscle and blubber crashing back down with a force that sends shockwaves through the ocean and threatens to swamp your tiny boat. Or perhaps it turns. You see the massive head, scarred and barnacled, swinging towards you, the small eyes seeming to fix on your boat with malevolent intelligence. The sheer size is overwhelming, dwarfing your fragile craft. Then comes the impact. The whale might ram the boat directly, its immense jaw capable of splintering thick oak planks like matchsticks. You hear the sickening crunch of wood, feel the boat lurch violently, and suddenly you are thrown into the churning icy water amidst the wreckage. The whale's tail, its flukes, are perhaps the most dangerous weapon. Wider than your boat is long. A single, well-aimed slap can send the entire craft, crew and all, flying into the air, or simply smash it to pieces beneath the waves. You see it coming, a dark shadow rising from the depths, and there is absolutely nothing you can do but brace for the inevitable, terrifying impact. Men scream, oars fly, and the cold shock of the water engulfs you. Even if the boat remains intact, the danger is far from over. A harpooned whale might thrash wildly, its movements unpredictable. It could dive suddenly, pulling the boat down with it if the line isn't cut in time. A desperate measure that means losing the whale and potentially facing the captain's wrath. It might roll, trying to dislodge the harpoon, creating a vortex that can capsize the boat. You are tossed about like a cork, desperately trying to maintain balance, bail water, and avoid being crushed or drowned. And then there's the whale's jaw. The lower jaw of a sperm whale is lined with conical teeth, each the size of your fist. While not typically used for attacking boats, a panicked or enraged whale might snap defensively. Stories circulate among the crew of men caught in those closing jaws, or boats bitten clean in two. You see the terror in the eyes of your fellow boatmen, the frantic efforts of the mate trying to maintain control. You feel the adrenaline coursing through you, a mixture of fear and desperate focus. This is not hunting, this is combat. You are facing an adversary far larger, stronger, and more at home in this element than you could ever be. Its power is primal, awe-inspiring, and utterly terrifying. If you survive an attack, if your boat is merely damaged, or if you're rescued from the water by another boat, you return to the main ship, shaken, soaked, and acutely aware of your own mortality. You might have lost shipmates, drowned or crushed in the encounter. You try to explain the ferocity of the whale to the captain or the men who remained aboard, but words fail to capture the sheer violence, the feeling of utter helplessness in the face of such raw power. And the worst part, tomorrow, if another whale is sighted, you will be expected to lower away and do it all again. The potential reward of oil is deemed worth the risk of your life, a calculation that feels increasingly skewed against you with every close call. The whale is not just prey, it is a force of nature that commands respect and inspires a deep, abiding fear. Surviving the diseases, the back-breaking labor, the psychological strain, and the fury of the whales requires fuel. But the sustenance provided aboard your 17th century whaling ship offers little comfort and even less nutritional value. Mealtimes are not moments of respite or pleasure. They are grim necessities, often involving consuming food that would turn the strongest stomach on land. Let's talk about the staples. The foundation of your diet is ship's biscuit, also known as hardtack. Forget the crisp crackers you might know. This is a flour and water biscuit baked to rock hardness, designed for longevity, not palatability. It's often months, even years old. Feel its density in your hand, like a slab of wood. To eat it, you often have to break it against the edge of a table or soak it in whatever liquid is available, usually stale water or weak grog, until it softens into a slightly more chewable, pulpy mass. But be cautious as you bite down. Hardtack is notoriously infested. Weevils and maggots burrow within, leaving behind tunnels and a fine dust. You learn to tap the biscuit sharply on the table before eating, hoping to dislodge some of the unwelcome protein, though you inevitably consume your share of insects. The taste is bland at best, often stale or moldy. Accompanying the biscuit is salted meat, typically beef or pork, preserved in brine-filled barrels. The salt concentration is immense, necessary to prevent spoilage, but rendering the meat incredibly tough and almost painfully salty. Imagine trying to chew a piece of leather that has been soaked in seawater. That gives you some idea. It has to be soaked for hours, sometimes days, to leach out some of the salt and make it remotely edible, but it rarely becomes tender. Often, it has a slightly rancid taste, especially as the voyage wears on and the barrels sit in the ship's warm, damp hold. The cook boils it, usually in the same perpetually greasy cauldron used for everything else, creating a grey, stringy substance floating in a scummy broth. This is your primary source of protein, day in, day out. And what do you wash this down with? Water is stored in wooden casks, and over long periods at sea, it rarely stays fresh. Feel the slimy texture inside the cask as you dip your cup. See the greenish tinge of algae. Smell the faint odour of stagnation. Often the water is brackish, unpleasant, barely drinkable. To make it more palatable, and perhaps to mask the taste, it's often mixed with rum to create grog. While the alcohol might offer a fleeting moment of warmth or numbness, it does little to hydrate you and contributes to the general cycle of poor health and dependence. The galley, the ship's kitchen, is usually a small, smoky, incredibly greasy space on deck, often housing the try-works furnace used for rendering blubber when a whale is caught. The cook, often an older sailor perhaps unfit for more strenuous duty, presides over this domain. Hygiene is a foreign concept. Utensils are wiped clean, perhaps, but rarely washed thoroughly. The main cooking vessel is a large iron cauldron, perpetually coated with layers of old grease and food remnants, lending a certain uniformity of flavour to everything prepared within. Imagine the smell emanating from this area. Wood smoke mingling with boiling salt meat, stale grease, and, during processing, the overwhelming stench of rendering blubber. Fresh food is a rare luxury. Occasionally, you might catch fish, or perhaps seabirds land on the ship, providing a brief respite from the monotony. But even these are often cooked poorly in the same greasy cauldron. There are no vegetables, no fruits, save perhaps for some onions or potatoes at the very beginning of the voyage, which quickly run out or rot. This lack, as we know, leads directly to scurvy and other deficiency diseases, weakening your body's ability to cope with the other hardships. Eating becomes a chore, something to be endured rather than enjoyed. You gulp down your meagre portion quickly, trying not to think too much about the taste, the texture, or the things you might have seen crawling in it moments before. The poor quality, the lack of variety, and the sheer unpleasantness of the food contribute significantly to the low morale and the pervasive ill health aboard the ship. It's fuel, yes, but it's dirty fuel, barely enough to keep the engine of your body running and contributing its own unique misery to your daily existence. Life aboard this floating world is governed by a rigid, unyielding hierarchy, as stark and unforgiving as the sea itself. You are not among equals. You are a cog in a machine, and your position is firmly fixed at the bottom. Understanding this structure is crucial to understanding the daily anxieties and the ever-present threat of punishment that hangs over you. At the apex sits the captain. He is lord and master of this small universe, his word absolute law. He holds the power of life and death, or at least the power to make your existence unbearable. His mood dictates the atmosphere of the entire ship. A fair captain might make the voyage merely harsh. A cruel or capricious one transforms it into a living hell. You learn to read his expressions, to anticipate his commands, to stay out of his line of sight when possible. He occupies the grandest cabin, eats the best provisions, relatively speaking, and rarely mingles with the common crew, maintaining a distance that reinforces his authority. Beneath him are the mates, first, second, perhaps third. They are the enforcers, the intermediaries who translate the captain's will into action and oversee the daily grind. They drive the crew, barking orders, inspecting work, and administering discipline. Some might be experienced seamen, others merely bullies elevated to positions of power. Your interactions with them are frequent and fraught with tension. A misplaced tool, a slow response, a perceived slight. Any minor infraction can draw their ire and lead to swift, unpleasant consequences. Then come the specialists, the harpooners, skilled men whose accuracy is vital to the voyage's success. They often enjoy slightly better status, and perhaps marginally better conditions than the rest of the foremast hands, but they are still subject to the mates and the captain. The cooper, responsible for the precious barrels that hold the oil. The cook, presiding over his greasy domain. The surgeon, if present. These roles have specific duties, but remain part of the working crew. And then there is you, an ordinary seaman, a foremast hand. You are the muscle, the labour, the expendable part. You sleep crammed together in the forecastle, eat the worst food, perform the hardest and most dangerous tasks, and bear the brunt of the discipline. Discipline is swift, brutal, and often public, designed not just to punish the offender, but to intimidate everyone else. Forget warnings or second chances. Infractions, real or imagined, are met with immediate correction. The most common form is flogging. If you incur the captain's serious displeasure, you might be tied to the grating or the mast, your back bared. Feel the collective silence fall over the crew, forced to witness the spectacle. Hear the whistle of the cat-o'-nine-tails, a whip with multiple knotted cords, as it cuts through the air. Feel the searing agony as it bites into your flesh, tearing skin, drawing blood. Each lash is counted out loud, a grim tally of your suffering. The pain is excruciating, the humiliation profound. Afterwards, your raw back is often rinsed with salt water, a supposed antiseptic measure that feels like fire. Lesser offences might earn you extra duties, confinement in irons in the dark, damp hold, or being sent to the masthead for hours on end. Imagine clinging precariously to the highest point of the mast, exposed to the biting wind, the rain, or the blazing sun, swaying sickeningly with every roll of the ship, exhaustion and fear your only companions. And then there are the truly terrifying punishments reserved for mutiny, desertion, or severe insubordination. Keel hauling, the dreaded passar o cabresto, is one such horror. You would be tied to a rope, thrown overboard, and dragged beneath the ship's hull, scraping against the rough, barnacle-encrusted wood, choking on seawater, emerging on the other side, if you survived, half drowned and lacerated. The chances of survival were slim. Drowning or severe injury were almost guaranteed. This constant threat of violence, the arbitrary nature of the justice meted out, creates an atmosphere of fear and resentment. There is no appeal, no recourse. You learn to keep your head down, to obey instantly, to suppress any sign of dissent. The hierarchy is absolute, the discipline savage. It is another layer of misery, another reason why this existence feels less like an occupation and more like a sentence. Once a whale has been successfully hunted and killed, and its massive carcass towed alongside the ship, the most defining and perhaps most disgusting phase of the operation begins, processing the blubber. Your ship transforms into a floating factory, an open-air abattoir dedicated to extracting the precious oil. This process, known as trying out, is a sensory nightmare, coating everything and everyone in a pervasive layer of grease and stench. First comes cutting in. The whale's carcass lies alongside, rolling in the swell. Men, including yourself, balance precariously on makeshift platforms or directly on the slippery corpse itself, wielding enormous, razor-sharp cutting spades attached to long wooden poles. Your job is to slice off huge strips of blubber, known as blanket pieces, often several feet wide and many feet long, weighing hundreds of pounds. Imagine the scene. You're standing on the dead whale, the deck slick with blood and oil, using all your strength to guide the heavy spade through the tough skin and thick fat. The risk of slipping and falling into the sea, or worse, into the whale's cavernous mouth, or amongst the sharks often attracted by the blood, is constant. The sheer scale of the task is immense. Peeling this giant feels like dissecting a small island. These enormous blanket pieces are hoisted aboard using heavy tackles rigged to the masts. They swing dangerously overhead before crashing onto the deck, which is now awash in gore and grease. Then, the blubber is cut into smaller, more manageable chunks called horse pieces, and finally into even smaller bits known as Bible leaves, because they resemble the pages of a thick book when sliced. This mincing process is relentless, often continuing around the clock under the watchful eyes of the mates. Your hands become coated in thick, sticky fat, the smell clinging to your skin and clothes. Now for the trying out itself. Central to this is the try-works, a brick furnace built directly onto the deck, housing 2, or sometimes more, enormous iron cauldrons, the try-pots. A fire is kindled beneath them, often using scraps of blubber from previous catches as fuel, the whale consuming itself in a grim irony. Feel the intense heat radiating from the furnace, a stark contrast to the ocean chill. See the thick, black, acrid smoke billowing into the sky, visible for miles, announcing your gruesome work to any other vessel. Into these boiling cauldrons, you toss the minced blubber. The fat begins to render, melting down into liquid oil. Imagine the sound, a constant, furious bubbling and sizzling. Imagine the smell, an overpowering, stomach-churning stench of burning fat, cooked meat and smoke that permeates everything. It gets into your nostrils, your throat, your hair, your clothes. There is no escaping it. The deck around the try-works becomes incredibly slippery and dangerous, coated in hot, spattered oil. You stand near the inferno, using long-handled balers and skimmers to stir the rendering mass, preventing it from scorching and skimming off the cooked scraps of tissue known as fritters. These fritters, crispy remnants of the blubber, are often thrown back into the fire as fuel, adding to the smoke and stench. Sometimes, desperate for a change from hardtack and salt meat, sailors might even eat these greasy scraps, a testament to the grimness of their usual diet. The rendered oil, clear and golden, is carefully ladled out of the try-pots and into cooling tanks before finally being funneled into barrels, the cooper's vital task. This work continues relentlessly until the entire whale is processed, which can take days depending on its size. You work in shifts, covered head to toe in grease and soot, breathing the foul air, your eyes stinging from the smoke, your skin irritated by the constant contact with oil. The ship becomes a vision of hell. Smoke, fire, the stench of burning flesh, and men moving like demons through the greasy haze. This is the heart of the whaling industry, the source of the profit, and arguably the most unpleasant, dangerous, and sensorily offensive part of your entire existence aboard this vessel. The relentless physical assault on your body is matched, perhaps even surpassed, by the slow, insidious erosion of your mind, the crushing monotony, the constant danger, the isolation, the poor diet, and the sheer sensory deprivation of the endless ocean conspire to fray the nerves and push men towards the brink of madness. You are trapped not just on a ship, but within the confines of your own skull, battling shadows both real and imagined. Think about the sheer lack of stimulation. Weeks turn into months with nothing to see but water, sky, and the same grimy deck. Nothing to hear but the creak of timbers and the wash of waves. Nothing to break the routine but back-breaking labor or terrifying violence. There are no new faces, no changes of scenery, no intellectual distractions beyond crude storytelling or gambling amongst the crew. Your world shrinks, and your mind, starved of novelty, can begin to turn inward in unhealthy ways. Loneliness is a constant companion, even amidst the crowded forecastle. You are surrounded by men, yet true connection is rare. Suspicion and resentment often simmer beneath the surface, fueled by the harsh hierarchy and competition for meager comforts. You might share a watch or a meal, but deep conversations, shared vulnerability, these are luxuries this life rarely affords. You miss home, family, friends, with an ache that deepens with each passing month. You might try writing letters, pouring out your heart onto precious paper, knowing they might never be read, or that the person you're writing to might be long dead by the time you return, if you return at all. This profound isolation can lead to strange behaviors. You see men talking to themselves, muttering under their breath as they work. Some develop obsessive habits, endlessly polishing a piece of brass or carving intricate patterns into scraps of wood or bone, anything to occupy the mind. Others stare blankly at the waves for hours, lost in thoughts they cannot or will not share. You might even find yourself developing peculiar attachments, perhaps talking to the ship's cat if there is one, or even addressing the seabirds that occasionally follow the ship, seeking some form of non-judgmental company. Sleep deprivation adds another layer of mental strain. The short, interrupted rest periods leave you perpetually fatigued, making concentration difficult and emotions raw. Exhaustion blurs the line between reality and imagination. In the dead of night, on watch, shapes in the darkness can seem to move, and the sounds of the ship can take on sinister meanings. Did that shadow just shift? Was that groan just the timbers or something else? And then come the delusions. Scurvy, beyond its physical effects, was known to cause mental disturbances. Malnutrition, fevers, and perhaps the liberal use of rum can all contribute to altered states of mind. You might hear whispers of men seeing things that aren't there, phantom islands on the horizon, ghostly figures in the rigging, long-lost loved ones walking the deck. Some descend into paranoia, convinced that certain crewmates are plotting against them, or that the captain intends to maroon them. True madness is not uncommon. Men snap under the pressure. It might manifest as sudden, inexplicable violence, or a complete withdrawal from reality, the sailor becoming unresponsive, catatonic. Sometimes, tragically, it leads to suicide, a desperate leap into the unforgiving ocean, seeking an end to the torment. Witnessing such breakdowns is deeply unsettling, a stark reminder of the fragility of the human mind under extreme duress. You find yourself questioning your own sanity, scrutinizing your thoughts and perceptions, terrified that you might be the next to succumb to the crushing weight of this existence. The ship becomes a pressure cooker for the psyche. The lack of privacy, the constant fear, the physical misery, the endless horizon. It all works together to unmoor you from your sense of self. You are not just fighting the elements and the whales. You are fighting to hold on to your own mind in a world designed to break it. The quiet moments, the long hours staring at the sea, are often the most dangerous, allowing the solitude and the strangeness of it all to seep into the cracks of your consciousness. After months, perhaps years, adrift in that world of brine, blubber, and brutality, the cry of "land ho" is a sound you thought you might never hear again. It sends a jolt through the weary crew, a mixture of disbelief, relief, and perhaps a strange sort of apprehension. The voyage is ending. Survival, against considerable odds, seems possible. But the return to land is not the simple, joyous homecoming you might have fantasized about during the long, dark watches. You watch as the coastline slowly resolves from a hazy smudge into solid shapes. Trees, hills, perhaps the distant cluster of buildings that signifies port. It looks unreal, foreign. After so long with only the shifting sea and the cramped confines of the ship, the stability of land feels disconcerting. Your legs, accustomed to the constant roll and pitch, might feel unsteady on solid ground, a condition sailors called sea legs, in reverse. As the ship finally anchors or ties up at the wharf, the smells of land rush out to meet you: damp earth, wood smoke, livestock, baking bread, maybe even flowers. They are overwhelmingly strong, almost alien compared to the familiar stench of bilge, oil, and unwashed bodies that has been your constant companion. It's a sensory shock, a reminder of the world you left behind, a world that continued on without you. Look at yourself, and at the men around you. You are not the same person who signed onto this voyage. Your skin is weathered, leathery, burned by sun and wind, perhaps scarred by rope burns, knife slips, or the lingering marks of disease or flogging. Your body is likely thinner, hardened by labor, but also weakened by malnutrition and illness. You might be missing fingers, a hand, perhaps even a leg, lost to accident or the surgeon's saw. The physical toll is etched onto your very being, and the invisible scars are often deeper. Your eyes might hold a haunted look, reflecting the things you've seen and endured. The terror of storms, the violence of the hunt, the deaths of shipmates, the crushing loneliness, the descent into near madness. You might find yourself startling at loud noises or scanning horizons that are no longer there. The constant vigilance, the ingrained habits of survival, don't simply vanish the moment you step ashore. You carry the sea within you, its vastness and its terrors. Then there is the smell. Despite washing, the pervasive odor of whale oil might cling stubbornly to your clothes, your hair, your skin. It's a scent that marks you, setting you apart from the landsman. People might subtly edge away from you in the street or tavern, wrinkling their noses. It's the indelible perfume of your profession, a constant reminder of the floating hell you inhabited. Collecting your pay, your share of the voyage's profits, if there are any significant profits after deductions for lost gear, advances, and the captain's various charges, might be an anticlimactic affair. The sum rarely feels adequate compensation for the risks taken, the time lost, the health broken. For many, it's barely enough to settle debts incurred before sailing, or perhaps just enough for a brief, wild spree ashore before poverty forces them to sign on for another voyage, trapping them in the cycle. Reconnecting with loved ones, if they are still there, can be fraught. You have been changed by your experiences in ways they cannot possibly understand. How do you explain the horrors you witnessed, the constant fear, the sheer grinding misery, to someone who has lived their life on solid ground? You might find yourself withdrawn, unable to relate, the shared language of your past life now feeling inadequate. You are a ghost returned, familiar, yet fundamentally altered. Some men never truly readjust. They remain haunted by the sea, by the whales, by the faces of lost comrades. They might drift, unable to settle, finding solace only in the company of other sailors who understand the unspoken truths of their shared experience. Others carry the physical ailments, the lingering effects of scurvy, persistent coughs from exposure, limbs that ache with phantom pains. You survived, yes, you made it back. But stepping back onto land isn't an end to the story. It's the beginning of trying to live with the echoes of the unspeakable horrors you endured on that 17th century whaling ship, echoes that may never truly fade. Beyond the visible hardships and the dramatic dangers, your existence is shared with a host of smaller, persistent, and utterly repulsive companions. Vermin are not just a nuisance aboard a 17th century whaler, they are an infestation, a crawling, scuttling, biting presence that underscores the pervasive lack of hygiene and adds another layer of discomfort and disease potential to your life. Let's start with the most notorious, the rats. They are everywhere. You hear them at night, their tiny claws scratching inside the walls of the forecastle, their rustling movements in the dark corners where provisions are stored. You see them darting across the deck in the dim light of the moon or the ship's lanterns, sleek, dark shapes disappearing into crevices. They are bold, driven by hunger, and show little fear of humans. Imagine waking in your hammock to find one perched nearby, its beady eyes glinting, or feeling a tickle as one scurries across your sleeping form. It's a violation, a constant reminder that you share your cramped living space with these unwelcome guests. They contaminate everything. They gnaw through sacks of grain and biscuit, leaving behind their droppings and urine, spreading filth and disease. They get into the water casks, sometimes drowning and putrefying, fouling the already questionable water supply. They chew on ropes, leather goods, even sleeping sailors' exposed skin or hair. Their presence is a constant battle, fought with traps, often rudimentary, clubs, or simply by trying to secure food stores as best as possible. A largely futile effort on a vessel filled with inaccessible nooks and crannies. Then there are the insects. Lice, as mentioned before, are your constant companions. They live in the seams of your coarse clothing, in your hair, in your bedding. Feel the incessant itching, a maddening irritation that follows you day and night. Scratching provides only momentary relief and often leads to broken skin, opening the door for infections in the grimy environment. Delousing is a communal activity, men picking through each other's hair and clothes, a brief moment of shared misery, but ultimately ineffective against the sheer scale of the infestation. The lice carry diseases like typhus, turning a simple itch into a potential death sentence. Fleas are equally prevalent, breeding in the straw or rough blankets used for bedding, feeding on both humans and rats. Their bites leave small, red, intensely itchy welts. Cockroaches, too, thrive in the damp, dark corners of the ship, particularly near the galley and food stores. Imagine the crunch underfoot as you walk below deck in the dark, or finding them swarming over leftover scraps of food. They scuttle away from light, a constant, disgusting reminder of the filth you inhabit. And don't forget the maggots and weevils in your food. The hardtack, as we discussed, is often riddled with them. You might try to pick them out, or simply resign yourself to the extra protein. Salted meat, if not properly stored, or if the brine weakens, can also become fly-blown, developing patches of writhing maggots. Discovering this in your meager ration is a stomach-turning experience, yet hunger might force you to scrape them off and eat the tainted meat anyway. Even the wood of the ship itself can harbour life. Shipworms, actually a type of clam, bore tunnels through the hull below the waterline, weakening the structure over time. While not a direct pest to you personally, the constant threat of the ship's integrity being compromised by these hidden borers adds to the underlying anxiety of sea travel. This constant presence of vermin contributes significantly to the sucked factor. It's not just the potential for disease. It's the constant itching, the unsettling feeling of being crawled upon, the contamination of food, the knowledge that you are living in close proximity to creatures universally associated with filth and decay. It reinforces the feeling of being trapped in an unclean, unhealthy environment, far removed from any semblance of comfort or civilization. These tiny horrors are a constant, gnawing presence, chipping away at your morale and your sense of basic human dignity, while the moments of frantic activity, the chase, the kill, the processing, sear themselves into your memory with their intensity and horror. Much of your time aboard this 17th century whaler is spent in a state quite the opposite: profound, soul-crushing boredom. The vast emptiness of the ocean is mirrored by the emptiness of the hours, days, and weeks stretching between sightings. A monotony that can be as mentally taxing as the physical labour. Imagine the rhythm, or lack thereof. After the flurry of processing a whale, the decks are cleaned as much as possible. The oil is barreled and stowed, and an uneasy calm descends. The ship sails on, searching. Days bleed into one another, marked only by the changing watches, the meagre meals, and the endless horizon. You stand your watch at the masthead, scanning the waves until your eyes ache, and the blue-grey expanse seems to hypnotize you. Nothing. Hour after hour, just the rise and fall of the ship, the creak of timbers, the sigh of the wind. What do you do to fill the time when not actively working or sleeping your brief exhausted sleep? The options are starkly limited. There are no books, no newspapers, no connection to the outside world. Your universe is contained within the ship's railings. Many sailors engage in scrimshaw, the intricate carving of whale teeth or bone using simple knives or sail needles. Feel the smooth, cool surface of a whale tooth in your hand. Picture yourself hunched over, painstakingly etching a scene, perhaps a ship, a whale, a remembered face from home, into the hard material. It requires intense focus, a way to channel restless energy and occupy the mind, creating small tokens of beauty amidst the squalor. But even this can only fill so many hours. Others might mend their ragged clothes, patching patches, sewing buttons with clumsy, calloused fingers. Or they might try to maintain the ship's gear, sharpening knives, splicing ropes, checking rigging, tasks born more out of a need to keep busy than immediate necessity. Gambling is common, though often forbidden by captains. Men huddle in corners, wagering precious pennies or tobacco rations on games of chance played with greasy handmade cards or dice carved from bone. These games often lead to arguments, resentment, and sometimes violence, adding another layer of tension to the close quarters. Storytelling is a vital pastime. Veterans spin yarns of past voyages, of monstrous whales, terrifying storms, exotic ports, often heavily embellished. Ghost stories and superstitions are shared in hushed tones during the night watches. Singing sea shanties provides a rhythmic outlet during heavy labor. But in the quiet hours, melancholic songs of home, loss, and longing might fill the forecastle. Voices rough but heartfelt, a shared expression of homesickness and despair. But mostly, there is waiting. You sit on deck, staring at the water. You lie in your hammock, staring at the deck beams above. You lean against the rail, feeling the salt spray, lost in thought or simply numb. The lack of purpose between hunts can be deeply demoralizing. You are here for one reason, to fill the ship with oil, and when that isn't happening, a sense of futility can creep in. Doubts surface. Will we ever find another whale? Will this voyage be a failure? Will we ever see home again? This boredom isn't restful, it's tense, expectant. Every crew member is constantly listening, watching, hoping for the shout that will break the monotony, even though that shout signals the return of danger and exhausting work. The waiting stretches nerves thin. Minor irritations fester. Small disagreements can escalate quickly in the absence of other distractions. The ship feels like a cage, pacing with restless energy that has no outlet. This grinding monotony, punctuated by periods of extreme stress and violence, creates a jarring psychological landscape. It's a different kind of horror, not the sharp terror of a charging whale, but the slow, dull ache of purposelessness, the erosion of spirit through sheer, unrelenting tedium. It's another facet of why this life sucked, a quiet, creeping despair born from the vast, empty hours on a vast, empty sea. Beyond the inherent dangers of the sea, the weather, and the whales themselves, the very tools of your trade represent a constant, immediate threat. The implements used to hunt, kill, and process these leviathans are brutally functional, often crude, and universally dangerous, especially when wielded by exhausted men on a perpetually unstable platform. A moment's inattention, a slip of the hand, a sudden lurch of the ship, any of these can lead to horrific injury or death. Consider the harpoon. It's not just a spear, it's a heavy iron head, wickedly barbed to prevent it from pulling out, mounted on a thick wooden shaft. The harpooner must stand balanced precariously in the bow of a small pitching boat, aiming for a moving target often partially submerged. A poorly thrown harpoon might glance off the whale's tough hide, ricocheting unpredictably. But the real danger often comes after the strike. The harpoon line, coiled meticulously in tubs, pays out at incredible speed. Imagine the blur of the rope flying past. If your hand, foot, or even just a fold of your clothing gets caught in a loop, you can be snatched overboard in an instant, dragged down into the depths before anyone can react, or have a limb severed cleanly by the friction and tension. Then there are the lances. Once the whale is harpooned and tires, the killing lance is used. This is a long pole with a razor-sharp, spade-like head. The goal is to thrust it deep into the whale's vitals, usually near the lungs, causing massive internal bleeding. This requires getting the whaleboat dangerously close to the dying, thrashing giant. Feel the boat heave as the whale convulses. See the lance thrust forward, seeking purchase. A misdirected thrust, or the whale suddenly rolling, could easily send the lance back towards the boat's occupants, or cause the lancer to lose balance and fall amongst the thrashing flukes or snapping jaws. Once the whale is dead and alongside the ship, the cutting-in process begins, bringing its own set of specialized dangers. The cutting spades, as mentioned, are enormous chisels on long poles. Wielding these heavy tools while balancing on the greasy carcass or a narrow cutting stage requires immense strength and skill. A slip could mean plunging into the shark-infested water or landing heavily on the deck. Worse, a misplaced cut could sever a rope holding a massive blanket piece, causing it to fall and crush anyone below. The spades themselves are kept razor sharp. Merely brushing against one accidentally could result in a deep, gaping wound, instantly prone to infection in the filthy conditions. Think about the boarding knife, a shorter, heavier blade used for close work on the blubber once it's on deck. Or the mincing knives used to slice the blubber into smaller pieces for the tripods. These are constantly in use, often wielded rapidly by men numbed by fatigue. Sliced fingers, deep cuts to hands and arms. These are commonplace injuries, often ignored unless they bleed profusely or become obviously infected. Even the tools for handling the oil present hazards. The large balers used to ladle boiling oil from the trypots are heavy and unwieldy. Spilling the scalding liquid onto yourself or a crewmate can cause horrific burns, instantly blistering skin, the hot oil clinging and continuing to burn. The decks around the tryworks are perpetually slick with cooling grease and hot spills, making every step treacherous, especially during the frantic activity of processing. Axes are used for various tasks, including chopping wood for the tryworks fire or dealing with particularly tough parts of the whale carcass. A misplaced swing in the cramped, cluttered space of the deck could easily strike a fellow sailor. There is no concept of safety equipment beyond perhaps trying to wrap rags around your hands for grip. The tools are brutally efficient for their purpose, but utterly unforgiving of human error. Every task, from the initial strike to the final barreling of oil, is fraught with the potential for sudden, gruesome injury inflicted by the very implements you rely on. You learn to handle them with extreme caution, yet familiarity and exhaustion inevitably breed carelessness. The constant proximity to sharp edges, heavy falling objects, high-tension ropes, and scalding liquids adds yet another layer of pervasive danger to your daily grind. Another reason your life expectancy feels perilously short. You might imagine that shared hardship would forge strong bonds among the crew, creating a tight-knit brotherhood facing adversity together. While moments of cooperation are necessary for survival and specific tasks, the reality of social dynamics aboard a 17th century whaler is often far more complex, fraught with tension, division, and simmering resentment. True camaraderie is a rare commodity in this harsh environment. Think about the composition of the crew. It's a motley collection, thrown together by circumstance rather than choice. Men from different countries, speaking different languages or dialects, with vastly different backgrounds. Experienced sailors alongside green hands, debtors fleeing creditors, petty criminals, farm boys seeking adventure and finding something else entirely. There's little common ground beyond the shared misery of the voyage. National prejudices and old rivalries easily surface in the cramped, stressful conditions. The rigid hierarchy we discussed earlier actively discourages fraternization across ranks. The captain and mates maintain their distance, often ruling through fear rather than respect. Any perceived friendliness between an officer and a common seaman might be viewed with suspicion by both sides. Within the ranks of the foremast hands, subtle hierarchies also exist. Experienced sailors might look down on newcomers, hazing them or assigning them the worst tasks. Harpooners, with their specialized skills, might hold themselves slightly aloof. Competition is rife. You compete for slightly better sleeping spots in the forecastle, for meager rations, for the captain's or mate's favor, or at least to avoid their negative attention. When ashore, you might compete for the attention of tavern maids or for scarce goods. This undercurrent of rivalry erodes trust and makes genuine friendship difficult to sustain. Imagine the forecastle, your primary living space. It's dark, damp, crowded, and foul-smelling. Dozens of men crammed into a small area, sleeping in tiered hammocks, with little privacy and constant noise. Tempers fray easily. A perceived insult, a stolen item, even something trivial like a plug of tobacco, snoring, personal habits. Anything can spark conflict. Arguments flare up quickly, sometimes escalating to fistfights or knife play, if not swiftly quelled by the mates, often with indiscriminate violence towards all involved. There's a pervasive atmosphere of suspicion. In a world where discipline is harsh and arbitrary, men are wary of speaking too freely, lest their words be twisted or reported to an officer. Grumbling about conditions is common, but open dissent is dangerous. You learn to keep your thoughts to yourself, to trust few, if any, completely. This guardedness prevents the formation of deep, supportive relationships. Moments of shared experience do occur, of course. surviving a brutal storm together, successfully capturing a large whale after a difficult chase, sharing a ration of grog during a brief respite. These moments can create temporary bonds. Singing shanties while working provides a sense of unity in rhythm and purpose. But these moments are often fleeting, overshadowed by the daily grind, the constant discomfort, and the underlying tensions. Consider the different motivations. Some men are on board simply to endure the voyage and collect their pay. Others might be ambitious, hoping to rise through the ranks. Some are escaping something on land. These differing goals and backgrounds mean there isn't always a shared sense of purpose beyond the immediate task at hand. Loyalty is often primarily to oneself, or perhaps to a small clique of men from the same town or background. This lack of strong social cohesion adds to the psychological burden. You feel isolated not just from the world, but often from the very men you share every waking and sleeping moment with. There's no reliable shoulder to cry on, no trusted confidant to share your deepest fears with. The misery is shared, yes, but often in silence, each man locked in his own struggle. This fractured social landscape, far from being a supportive brotherhood, is just another element contributing to the profound difficulty and unpleasantness of your life at sea. Beyond the immediate, visceral dangers, a constant underlying anxiety stems from something fundamental: the profound uncertainty of your position on the vast, featureless ocean. In the 17th century, navigation is far from an exact science. It's a precarious blend of rudimentary instruments, careful observation, educated guesswork, and often sheer luck. The fear of becoming truly lost, of missing your intended landfall or whaling ground, is a constant companion. Forget GPS or even reliable chronometers. Your primary tools for finding your way are primitive by modern standards, demanding skill and interpretation under often difficult conditions. Picture yourself on deck, perhaps assisting the captain or a mate, trying to make sense of your place in the world. The main instrument for determining latitude, your distance north or south of the equator, might be a cross staff or an astrolabe, perhaps a backstaff later in the century. Imagine holding this wooden or brass instrument, trying to align it with the horizon and the sun at noon or the North Star at night. The ship is constantly moving, pitching and rolling. Your hands are cold or unsteady. Getting an accurate reading requires practice, a steady hand, and clear skies, conditions often absent at sea. An error of even a degree translates to 60 nautical miles of uncertainty. Determining longitude, your position east or west, is an even greater challenge, the infamous longitude problem that would plague mariners for another century. Without accurate clocks, chronometers, to measure the time difference between your location and a known reference point, longitude is largely guesswork. You rely on dead reckoning. This involves estimating your speed, perhaps by throwing a log tied to a knotted rope overboard and timing how fast the knots pay out. The origin of measuring speed in knots, tracking your compass course, itself prone to magnetic variation, and factoring in estimated leeway, the sideways drift caused by wind and currents. Feel the uncertainty in this process. Every estimate introduces potential error. After days or weeks without sighting land, your calculated position could be dozens, even hundreds, of miles off from your actual location. Charts exist, but they are often inaccurate, based on previous voyages' flawed data, or even mythical islands and coastlines. Imagine poring over a stiff parchment chart in the dim light of the captain's cabin, trying to reconcile your dubious calculations with the often fanciful representations of the world. Is that island marked here real? Is that coastline truly shaped like that? Trusting the chart completely can be as dangerous as ignoring it. Your senses become crucial navigational tools, however unreliable. You learn to read the color of the water, the patterns of the waves, the types of seabirds sighted, the direction of the swell, all potential clues to proximity to land or specific currents. You sniff the air, hoping to catch the scent of land, damp earth, vegetation, carried on the wind. These are subtle, easily misinterpreted signs, yet often all you have to go on. The consequences of navigational errors are severe. Missing a whaling ground means wasted time, dwindling provisions, and a potentially unprofitable voyage. Missing your intended landfall on the return journey could be catastrophic, leading to shipwreck on an unknown coast, starvation, or dying of thirst within sight of land you cannot reach. Running aground unexpectedly due to poor charting or inaccurate positioning is a constant fear, especially when sailing in unfamiliar waters or poor visibility. This persistent uncertainty about your location adds a significant psychological burden. You are adrift in multiple senses, physically, temporally, and geographically. The captain and mates, responsible for navigation, carry this weight heavily, knowing the crew's survival depends on their often flawed calculations. For you, the common sailor, there is a feeling of profound helplessness, entirely dependent on the skills and luck of those in charge. You put your faith in their ability to read the sun, the stars, and the crude instruments, hoping they can somehow guide this small wooden world through the vast, unmarked wilderness of the ocean, and eventually, back home. The lack of certainty, the constant potential for being utterly lost, is another thread in the tapestry of fear and hardship that defines your life. While the terror of a full-blown gale is undeniable, the sea throws a relentless variety of lesser, yet still dangerous and deeply unpleasant, weather conditions at you. It's not just about surviving the occasional hurricane. It's about enduring the constant wearying assault of the elements in all their forms, day after day, week after week, with nowhere to hide. Consider the fog. It can roll in silently, unexpectedly, blanketing the ocean in a thick, damp shroud. Visibility drops to near zero. Imagine standing watch on deck, unable to see the bow of your own ship, let alone the horizon or any approaching hazards. The world shrinks to an immediate circle of grey, muffling sounds and creating an eerie, disorienting silence. The danger of collision with another vessel, an iceberg in colder latitudes, or unseen rocks near land becomes terrifyingly real. Navigation becomes pure guesswork. The dampness seeps into everything, your clothes, your bedding, your bones, bringing a penetrating chill. The fog might linger for days, trapping the ship in a state of blind anxiety, every creak and groan amplified, every shadow seeming to hold a threat. Then there's the relentless rain. Not just brief showers, but days of cold, driving rain that soaks you to the skin the moment you step on deck. Your oilskins, if you are fortunate enough to possess them, offer limited protection against such a prolonged soaking. Water drips constantly from the rigging, pools on the deck, and finds its way below, making the already damp forecastle even more miserable. Working in the rain is wretched. Ropes become slippery and heavy, footing is treacherous, and the chill seeps deep into your muscles, making every movement stiff and painful. There's no escaping the dampness. Even below deck, the air hangs thick with moisture, and mildew thrives. Conversely, you might endure periods of dead calm under a blazing tropical sun. The ship lies motionless on a glassy sea, sails hanging limp. The heat is oppressive, reflecting off the water, beating down on the deck. The pitch between the planks might soften and bubble. There is no breeze to offer relief, only the stifling, humid air. Sweat pours off you, stinging your eyes, soaking your clothes. The risk of heat stroke is real, especially during strenuous activity like rowing a whaleboat or working the trypots. The water supplies dwindle and become warm and unpalatable. Tempers flare even more easily in the suffocating heat. The ship feels like an oven, and the waiting for wind becomes an agony of impatience and discomfort. In colder climes, you face freezing temperatures, biting winds, and the dangers of ice. Salt spray freezes onto the rigging and deck, coating everything in a treacherous layer of ice. Imagine climbing the rigging, your hands numb with cold, trying to grip ropes as stiff and slippery as glass. Frostbite is a constant threat to exposed fingers, toes, ears, and noses. Icebergs, majestic but deadly, might loom out of the mist, forcing sudden, desperate maneuvers. Even the simple act of handling ropes can tear the skin off frozen hands. Sudden squalls can arise with little warning. brief but violent bursts of wind and rain that test the ship and crew. Sails might need to be reefed or furled rapidly to prevent damage, sending you scrambling aloft in treacherous conditions. These squalls can capsize smaller boats or cause significant damage to the ship's rigging, if not handled quickly and expertly. Even seemingly benign conditions have their downsides. A persistent headwind slows progress to a crawl, prolonging the voyage, straining provisions, and fraying nerves. Rolling waves, even without strong winds, create a constant, nauseating motion that affects even seasoned sailors, making sleep difficult and simple tasks challenging. This constant battle with the weather, in all its varied unpleasantness, wears you down physically and mentally. There is no comfortable temperature, no reliably dry place, no escape from the wind, the wet, the heat, or the cold. It's a perpetual state of exposure, another layer of misery that grinds away at your resilience, reminding you daily of your vulnerability to forces far beyond your control. We've touched upon the sights and the physical sensations, but let's immerse ourselves more deeply into the constant, unavoidable assault on your other senses. Hearing and smell. Aboard this 17th century whaler, there is no escape from the cacophony of noises and the pervasive, often revolting odours that define your environment. They seep into your consciousness, becoming the background track to your misery. Let's focus first on the smells. We mentioned the unholy trinity upon arrival: bilge, oil, unwashed bodies. But this barely scratches the surface. Imagine the layers of scent that accumulate over a long voyage. The forecastle, where you sleep, develops its own unique bouquet. Stale sweat, damp wool, and canvas that never truly dries. The faint but persistent odour of vomit from seasick sailors. The ammonia tang from waste buckets. The mustiness of mildew, and underlying it all, the greasy signature of whale oil that impregnates the very wood. It's thick, cloying, inescapable. You breathe it in your sleep. You taste it on the back of your throat. On deck, the smells shift, but rarely improve. The sharp, salty tang of the sea air is often overwhelmed. There's the tar used constantly on the rigging, a pungent, sticky smell. The smoke from the galley fire, carrying hints of whatever dubious meal is being boiled. And then, during processing, the truly overwhelming stench of the try-works dominates everything. That smell of burning blubber, hot oil, and cooked meat is indescribable, thick, acrid, greasy, clinging to the air for miles. Add to this the metallic tang of whale blood sluicing across the decks, the smell of decay from scraps of meat or blubber left too long in the sun, the odour of the sharks sometimes hauled aboard and butchered for their livers. Even the smell of the live whales themselves, when close, is distinctive. A fishy, musky breath exhaled in great plumes. Your food, as discussed, adds its own olfactory dimension. The stale, sometimes mouldy smell of hardtack. The sharp, almost corrosive smell of heavily salted meat being soaked. The faint putrescence of water gone bad. There is no escaping odour. It is simply a matter of which unpleasant scent dominates at any given moment. Now, consider the sounds. The ship itself is a constant source of noise. The rhythmic, groaning creak of timbers under strain is the most pervasive sound, a constant reminder of the stresses on the vessel. Sometimes it's a low moan, sometimes a sharp crack that makes you jump. The slap and gurgle of water against the hull, the rush of waves breaking over the bow, the hiss of spray. The wind whistles and howls through the rigging, its pitch changing with its strength, sometimes sounding like whispers, sometimes like screams. Then there are the sounds of work, the thud of feet on the deck, the sharp cries of orders from the mates, the answering shouts of the crew, the rhythmic squeak and strain of the capstan as heavy loads are hoisted, the clang of iron tools, the rasp of sail needles through canvas, the thud of mallets on wood during repairs, the frantic splash of oars during a chase, the whirring song of the harpoon line paying out, the sickening thud as the harpoon strikes home. During the processing, the sounds intensify. the crackle and roar of the fire in the tryworks furnace, the furious bubbling and sizzling of rendering blubber in the trypots, the rhythmic chop-chop-chop of mincing knives cutting Bible leaves, the heavy thud of blanket pieces being dropped onto the deck, the shouts and curses of men working in the heat and grease. The sounds of the crew themselves contribute to the soundscape: rough laughter, muttered conversations, arguments flaring up, the occasional burst of song, shanty or lament, the snores and coughs from the forecastle, the groans of the sick or injured, and beneath it all, the unsettling sounds, the constant scuttling and scratching of rats within the ship's structure, the distant mournful calls of whales, the strange cries of unseen seabirds at night, the unnerving silence of a dead calm or a thick fog. Your ears become attuned to every nuance, learning to distinguish the normal groans of the ship from sounds that might signal danger. A splitting plank, a fraying rope, the approach of a storm. This constant auditory input, much like the smells, offers no peace, contributing to the overall sensory overload and the feeling of being trapped in a harsh, demanding, and thoroughly unpleasant world. We touched upon the prevalence of disease and injury, but let's delve into the grim reality of medical care available to you should you fall seriously ill or suffer a major wound. If your vessel is large enough or fortunate enough to carry a designated surgeon, don't picture a skilled physician. More often, he's a man with rudimentary training, perhaps some experience as a barber surgeon ashore, whose primary qualification might simply be a strong stomach and a willingness to wield sharp instruments. His interventions often pose as much danger as the ailment itself. Imagine the surgeon's domain, if he has one, likely a small, cramped space below deck, poorly lit and far from clean. His tools are laid out: saws for amputation, knives of various sizes, probes, forceps, perhaps a terrifying device called a trephine for drilling holes in the skull, a treatment for head injuries. Sterilization is an unknown concept. Instruments are likely wiped clean on a dirty rag, carrying bacteria from one patient to the next. His understanding of infection is minimal. Pus is often seen as a normal part of healing, laudable pus, rather than a sign of dangerous contamination. If you suffer a serious injury, a deep cut from a cutting spade, a crushed limb from shifting cargo, a severe burn from the tryworks, the surgeon's approach is direct and brutal. There is no anesthesia beyond perhaps a large dose of rum or opium, which does little to dull the searing agony of his procedures. Feel yourself being held down by strong crewmates as the surgeon approaches with his saw to amputate a mangled limb. Hear the grating sound of saw on bone, smell the blood, feel the waves of nausea and pain wash over you. Survival of such an operation depends less on the surgeon's skill and more on your own constitution and sheer luck in avoiding fatal infection or blood loss. Bloodletting, as mentioned, is a near universal remedy. Whether you have a fever, a headache, breathing difficulties, or almost any other complaint, the surgeon is likely to reach for his lancet. He'll open a vein, usually in the arm, and drain a quantity of blood, believing this will rebalance the body's humours, an ancient medical theory. Imagine the weakness that follows, the dizziness, as precious blood flows into a bowl. In reality, this practice often weakens already sick patients, making them more vulnerable to their illness. Treatments for diseases are equally crude and often ineffective. Mercury, a potent neurotoxin, is a common treatment for syphilis, administered as ointments or even pills. It causes excessive salivation, tooth loss, tremors, and neurological damage, often killing the patient faster than the disease itself. Purgatives and emetics are used liberally to cleanse the system, resulting in violent vomiting and diarrhea that further dehydrate and weaken the sick. For wounds, dressings are basic, perhaps linen bandages, often reused, soaked in ineffective or even harmful substances like tar or various herbal concoctions. The surgeon might probe the wound with unsterilized fingers or instruments, searching for foreign objects, but likely introducing infection. If gangrene sets in, a common occurrence, the only recourse is amputation, often performed too late. Even diagnosing ailments is challenging. The surgeon relies on basic observation, perhaps feeling the pulse or examining the tongue, but lacks the diagnostic tools and knowledge we take for granted. Fevers are just fevers. Infections are just infections. Subtle distinctions are lost, and treatments are applied broadly, often inappropriately. If there is no designated surgeon, medical care falls to the captain or one of the mates, whose knowledge is likely even more rudimentary, based on folk remedies, superstition, or perhaps a single outdated medical guide kept in the cabin. In such cases, you might be left largely to fend for yourself, relying on your shipmates for basic care, or simply hoping your body can overcome the illness or injury on its own. This lack of effective medical care creates a constant, low-level dread. Any significant illness or injury is potentially fatal. You watch your crewmates suffer and die from conditions that would be easily treatable today. You know that if you fall seriously ill, your chances are slim, and the cure might be as agonizing as the disease. The surgeon, far from being a figure of hope, often represents another source of fear, a well-intentioned but ultimately dangerous practitioner operating in the dark ages of medicine, adrift on an unforgiving sea. After endless weeks or months staring at nothing but the grey horizon and the grimy deck, the prospect of shore leave, even in a rough-and-tumble port town, feels like salvation. It's a chance to escape the confines of the ship, to feel solid ground, to taste different food, perhaps even enjoy female company. But this brief taste of freedom is often illusory, fraught with its own set of dangers and disappointments, frequently leaving you worse off than before. Imagine the anticipation as the ship approaches a port, perhaps a remote island outpost, a bustling colonial harbour, or a notorious haven for sailors and pirates. The mood aboard lifts slightly, a nervous energy replacing the usual torpor or tension. You dream of fresh food, strong drink, soft beds, and forgetting the hardships of the sea, if only for a few days. As you finally step ashore, the sensory overload hits you again, but differently than the return home. The smells of land, dust, animals, cooking fires, unfamiliar vegetation, sewage, mingle with the smells of the port itself: tar, saltfish, cheap perfume, stale alcohol. The sounds are a cacophony compared to the ship. Vendors hawking wares, tavern music spilling into the street, shouts, laughter, arguments in multiple languages, the rumble of carts. It's chaotic, vibrant, and initially exhilarating after the monotony of the sea. You likely receive a small advance on your pay, or perhaps you have some saved scrimshaw to trade. Money burns a hole in your pocket. The first destination is almost invariably a tavern. Feel the rough wooden bench beneath you, the sticky counter under your elbows. Taste the fiery spirits, cheap rum, arrack, or potent local brews, that you gulp down eagerly, seeking oblivion rather than savour. The alcohol hits hard after weeks of enforced sobriety or weak grog. Judgment quickly evaporates. These port towns thrive on sailors flush with cash or credit against their future earnings. You are prey. Tavern keepers water down drinks and inflate prices. Gamblers with loaded dice or marked cards fleece unsuspecting seamen. Prostitutes offer fleeting comfort, but also disease. The syphilis or gonorrhea you might contract here could plague the rest of your voyage or your life. Thieves and press gangs lurk in the shadows, ready to rob you of your meager earnings or drag you onto another ship if you become too intoxicated or isolated. Even finding decent food can be a challenge. While a welcome change from hardtack, the fare in dockside eateries is often greasy, poorly prepared, and potentially unsafe, leading to stomach ailments that are particularly unwelcome back aboard ship. Fresh fruit might be available, a vital source of vitamin C, but it's often expensive, and you might prioritize alcohol over health. Fights are common. Sailors from different ships, different nations, or even your own crewmates, fueled by alcohol and pent-up aggression, clash over perceived insults, gambling debts, or women. A brawl can easily escalate, involving knives or clubs, leaving men injured or worse. The freedom is short-lived. After a few days, or however long the captain allows for reprovisioning or minor repairs, the call comes to return to the ship. Often you stumble back aboard with an aching head, an empty pocket, perhaps a new dose of venereal disease, and a profound sense of anti-climax. The brief escape has only highlighted the misery of your usual existence, and you may have acquired new problems to carry back to sea. For some, shore leave proves fatal. A drunken fall into the harbour, a knife in a dark alley, succumbing to a sudden illness contracted ashore. Not everyone who steps off the ship steps back on. Others might desert, attempting to escape the whaling life, though this carries its own risks of capture, punishment, or simply starving in an unfamiliar land. This cycle of deprivation, followed by brief, often self-destructive, indulgence, is part of the whaler's life. Shore leave isn't a true respite. It's often just a transfer from the dangers of the sea to the dangers of the port. It offers a fleeting illusion of choice and pleasure, but ultimately reinforces the harsh realities and lack of control that define your existence. The hangover, both literal and metaphorical, serves only to make the return to the ship's familiar horrors feel even more bleak. The lure that draws many men, including perhaps yourself, into the brutal embrace of a whaling voyage is the promise of wealth. Stories circulate of ships returning laden with oil, their crews earning fortunes, enough to buy land, start a business, or live comfortably for years. But like so much else in this life, the financial reality is often far harsher, more precarious, and ultimately disappointing than the hopeful tales suggest. You signed on not for a fixed wage, but for a lay or share of the voyage's profits. This system sounds potentially lucrative. Your earnings are tied directly to the success of the hunt. A common sailor might be offered a lay of 1/150th or perhaps 1/200th of the net profit, while skilled harpooners or mates command significantly larger shares, and the captain and ship owners take the lion's share. On paper, if the ship returns full of valuable sperm oil or whalebone, even a small fraction could represent a substantial sum compared to meagre shore wages. But the calculation is fraught with pitfalls. Firstly, the profit is net, not gross. This means numerous deductions are made before your share is calculated. The cost of outfitting the ship, purchasing provisions, however poor, repairing gear, paying port fees, all these expenses are subtracted from the value of the oil brought back. Captains and owners have considerable leeway in calculating these costs, often inflating them to minimize the crew's final payout. Secondly, you likely took an advance on your future earnings before the voyage even began, perhaps to settle debts or leave some money for family ashore. You might also have drawn supplies from the ship's slop chest during the voyage. Basic necessities like clothing, tobacco, or a knife, sold at exorbitant markups. These debts are deducted from your share at the end, often with interest. Thirdly, the success of the voyage is entirely unpredictable. You might spend months at sea encountering few whales, or lose valuable catches due to storms or accidents. The price of whale oil fluctuates based on market demand. A voyage that seemed promising might yield little actual profit due to bad luck or falling prices. Imagine the crushing disappointment after years of hardship to find out the voyage barely broke even, or worse, operated at a loss. Even if the voyage is successful and the ship returns full, the final accounting process can be opaque and lengthy. Owners might delay payment, claim unforeseen expenses, or dispute the quality or quantity of the oil. You, as a common sailor, have little power to challenge their figures. You are often desperate for any payment to get back on your feet after years away, making you vulnerable to accepting whatever settlement is offered. Consider the scenario. You return after 2, maybe 3 years at sea. You've endured disease, filth, terror, back-breaking labour, and constant danger. You've seen men die. You yourself might be physically or mentally scarred. You eagerly await your settlement, dreaming of the comforts or security it will buy. Then comes the accounting. After deductions for the ship's costs, your advances, your slop chest debts, and perhaps fines levied by the captain for minor infractions, your 1/175th share amounts to almost nothing. Perhaps just enough to pay off your debts, leaving you penniless, exactly where you started, only older, wearier, and more broken. Or worse, you might find yourself actually in debt to the owners, legally obligated to sign on for another voyage just to work it off. This financial precariousness is a constant source of anxiety. The potential reward is always distant, uncertain, while the hardships are immediate and guaranteed. The lay system, while appearing to offer partnership, often functions to transfer the financial risk of the voyage onto the crew, while ensuring the owners and captain profit regardless. The dream of striking it rich keeps men signing on, but the reality for most is a cycle of debt, hardship, and disappointment, another cruel aspect of the whaler's unforgiving world. Amidst the overwhelming tide of hardship, danger, and filth, you might wonder if there were any moments of respite, any small comforts or fleeting joys that made this existence even remotely bearable. Were there glimmers of light in the oppressive gloom? The truth is, such moments were scarce, often simple, and always overshadowed by the harsh reality. Yet the human spirit, even in the direst circumstances, seeks out whatever small solace it can find. Perhaps the most universally appreciated comfort was tobacco. If you were fortunate enough to have a supply, or could afford it from the slop chest, the ritual of packing and lighting a pipe offered a brief escape. Imagine finding a relatively sheltered spot out of the wind, perhaps huddled with a few others. Feel the familiar weight of the clay pipe in your hand. See the small glow as you light the tightly packed leaves. Taste the acrid smoke, inhaling deeply. For a few precious minutes, the ritual itself provides focus, a small measure of control. The nicotine offers a fleeting buzz, a momentary dulling of anxiety or fatigue. Sharing tobacco could be a rare gesture of goodwill, a small currency of connection in a distrustful environment. Music, as mentioned, provided another outlet. The rhythmic call and response of work shanties not only coordinated labour, but also offered a shared voice, a way to endure the strain together. In quieter moments, someone might produce a fiddle or a simple flute, playing melancholic tunes that spoke of home and longing. Picture the scene in the dim forecastle. The rough notes of a familiar melody cutting through the usual sounds of snoring and creaking timbers. Men listen silently, perhaps humming along, transported for a moment away from the greasy reality of the ship. It's a bittersweet comfort, evoking nostalgia, but also providing a brief, shared emotional release. Grog, the mixture of rum and water, was a daily ration on many ships. While contributing to health problems and dependency, the warming effect of the alcohol and the temporary numbness it provided were undoubtedly seen as a comfort by many. Feel the fiery liquid go down, spreading a fleeting warmth through your chest, briefly pushing back the chill or the gnawing fatigue. The shared ritual of the daily tot could be a moment of brief, if artificial, cheerfulness. Successful moments in the hunt, despite the danger and gore, could bring a grim satisfaction and a temporary boost in morale. Seeing a large whale secured alongside, knowing it represented potential profit, however slim your share might be, could create a sense of collective achievement. The intense, focused activity of the chase and processing, while exhausting, was at least a break from the crushing boredom of searching. Rare encounters with other ships at sea could break the isolation. Exchanging news, trading goods, or simply seeing different faces offered a brief connection to the wider world, a reminder that life existed beyond your own vessel's railings. Similarly, sighting land, even if not your final destination, could lift spirits, offering tangible proof that the endless ocean did eventually end. Simple things might provide fleeting pleasure, a rare day of calm seas and warm sun without oppressive heat, a spectacular sunset painting the sky, the playful antics of dolphins swimming alongside the ship, or even just a slightly less weevil-infested biscuit, or a piece of meat that wasn't quite as tough as shoe leather. Finding a relatively dry spot to sleep, managing to wash some of the grime off with collected rainwater. These small victories against the pervasive discomfort could feel significant, but it's crucial to keep these moments in perspective. They were exceptions, not the rule. They were small islands in a vast ocean of misery. The tobacco runs out, the fiddle string breaks, the grog wears off, the sun gives way to rain or fog, the brief camaraderie dissolves back into suspicion. These glimmers were not enough to truly alleviate the suffering, but they were perhaps just enough to allow men to endure it, to find the will to face another day in the hope of experiencing another small, fleeting moment of relief. They highlight, by their very scarcity and simplicity, the profound lack of comfort that defined the 17th century whaler's life. Much of your work as a sailor involves leaving the relative, though minimal, security of the deck and ascending into the complex web of ropes, spars and sails known as the rigging. Working aloft is not optional, it's essential for setting, furling and repairing sails and for keeping lookout. But this vertical world, high above the churning sea, carries its own unique and terrifying set of dangers, demanding agility, strength and nerves of steel. Imagine the order comes, aloft and furl the topsail. You kick off your shoes, if you wear any, for better grip. Your ascent begins on the ratlines, short lengths of rope tied horizontally across the shrouds, the heavy ropes supporting the mast, forming a crude ladder. Feel the rough tarred rope under your bare feet and calloused hands. The ship is never still. It pitches and rolls, causing the mast and rigging to sway sickeningly. You climb steadily, relying on practiced movements, trying not to look down at the shrinking deck far below. As you climb higher, the wind becomes stronger, whipping at your clothes, threatening to tear your grip loose. The motion of the ship is amplified up here. The masthead scribes a wide arc against the sky. You reach the yard arm, a long horizontal spar from which a sail is set. To furl the sail, you must edge your way out along the yard, balancing on a single foot rope slung beneath it. Picture yourself dozens, perhaps over 100 feet above the water, clinging to the spar with one hand, using the other to wrestle with the heavy flogging canvas of the sail. The foot rope sways precariously. Your balance is crucial. A sudden gust of wind, a misstep, a moment of dizziness, any could send you plummeting. Falling from the rigging is almost invariably fatal. You might hit the deck with bone-shattering force or plunge into the ocean. Even if you survive the impact with the water, the chances of rescue are slim. The ship might be moving too fast to stop easily, especially in heavy weather. By the time a boat could be lowered, if it's even possible, you might have drowned, succumbed to hypothermia in cold waters, or been taken by sharks attracted by the ship or previous whale kills. Every ascent carries this implicit risk. Working aloft during a storm is exponentially more dangerous. The rigging is coated in rain or freezing spray, making every handhold treacherous. The wind howls, threatening to rip the sail, or you, from the yard. The ship rolls violently, snapping you back and forth like the end of a whip. Visibility might be near zero, yet sails must be managed to prevent the ship from being dismasted or capsized. You cling on, numb with cold and fear, performing complex tasks by feel, praying the ropes hold, praying you hold. There are other hazards besides falling. Ropes can chafe and break under strain, especially older or poorly maintained ones. A snapping line can recoil with lethal force, or cause a spar to fall, potentially striking men on deck or aloft. Blocks, pulleys, can jam or break, dropping heavy gear. During the chaos of sail handling, it's easy to get tangled in ropes or struck by flogging canvas or swinging blocks. Standing lookout duty at the masthead presents its own challenges. You might be perched in a small crow's nest or simply standing on the highest yard, exposed to the elements for hours on end. The constant scanning strains your eyes. The isolation can be profound. In rough weather, the violent motion can induce severe seasickness. In extreme cold, the risk of frostbite is acute. Falling asleep on watch, though tempting due to exhaustion, is a dereliction of duty punishable by flogging, and could be fatal if you lose your balance. This constant proximity to falling, the exposure, the demanding physical exertion in precarious positions, it all adds to the relentless stress. Your survival depends on your strength, your agility, your focus, and the integrity of the ropes and wood around you. The view from the masthead might occasionally offer a breathtaking panorama of the ocean, but it's a beauty always tinged with the knowledge that a single mistake could send you into the abyss below. The whaleboat itself, the primary tool for engaging your colossal prey, deserves closer examination. It's not a sturdy lifeboat designed for safety. It's a specialized hunting craft, built for speed and maneuverability above all else, often sacrificing robustness in the process. Your life frequently depends on this surprisingly fragile shell of wood and nails, and the dangers associated specifically with it are numerous and terrifying. Picture the whaleboat, typically around 28-30 feet long, clinker-built with overlapping planks, from light cedar wood to keep it swift and buoyant. It's double-ended, sharp at both bow and stern, allowing for quick changes in direction or backing away from danger. It's crewed by 6 men, 5 oarsmen providing the power, and the boat header, usually a mate or the captain, steering with a long oar and commanding the crew. The harpooner stands ready in the bow. Feel how light it seems as it's lowered from the ship's davits onto the water. It rides high, almost skittishly, on the waves. Its thin cedar planks offer little resistance to a direct impact from a whale, floating debris, or even collision with another boat in the chaos of a hunt. Capsizing is a constant risk. A sudden lurch caused by a wave, a poorly coordinated movement by the crew, or the immense pull of a harpooned whale diving can easily flip the boat, spilling everyone into the cold, churning water. Imagine the frantic scramble if you capsize. You are weighed down by heavy, waterlogged clothing. Oars, tubs, lances, and other gear float alongside the wreckage, creating a hazardous obstacle course. The immediate priority is to cling to the overturned or swamped boat, hoping it stays afloat long enough for rescue. But rescue is not guaranteed. The mothership might be miles away, engaged with other boats, or simply too far to have seen your plight. Other whaleboats might be preoccupied with their own hunts. Hypothermia sets in quickly in cold waters. And of course, there's the persistent fear of sharks attracted by the commotion, or the blood from a wounded whale. The equipment stowed within the boat also presents dangers. The harpoon line, hundreds of fathoms long, is coiled meticulously in 2 or 3 tubs. We've mentioned the danger of entanglement, but the sheer speed and force with which it pays out can also cause friction burns or set the wooden loggerhead, around which the line is snubbed to control the whale's run, smoking, or even bursting into flames. Water must constantly be doused on the loggerhead and line to prevent this. A tangled line can jam, potentially snapping the rope or pulling the boat under. Sharp implements fill the boat: harpoons, lances, cutting spades for later use, knives for cutting the line in an emergency. In the violent motion of a chase or a whale's struggles, these tools can be tossed about, posing a risk of impalement or deep cuts to the occupants. A misplaced oar handle, driven back by a wave or a sudden stop, can strike a man with bone-breaking force. During the Nantucket sleigh ride, when the harpooned whale tows the boat at high speed, the boat skips and slams across the waves. Maintaining your position on the thwart, the rowing seat, requires bracing yourself constantly. Being thrown about inside the boat can cause injuries. Being thrown out of the boat at such speeds is incredibly dangerous, leaving you far behind in the whale's wake. Even the simple act of rowing for hours on end takes its toll in the confines of the boat. Blisters form on your hands, turning into raw, weeping sores. Your muscles ache and cramp. The cramped conditions offer little room to shift position or stretch. These boats are essential, but they offer minimal protection. They are platforms for attack, not vessels of safety. Every time you lower away from the relative security of the ship and take your place on the thwart, you are entering a zone of heightened risk, entrusting your life to thin planks of wood, the skill of the boat header, the unpredictable ocean, and the even more unpredictable behavior of your gigantic quarry. The whaleboat is the fragile, expendable tip of the spear, and you are its equally expendable crew. After days of relentless, greasy labor, the trypots finally cool, the last barrels of oil are stowed below deck, and a semblance of order returns to the ship. But one significant task remains, often overlooked in romanticized accounts: dealing with the colossal remains of the whale carcass. What happens to the tons of meat, bone, and viscera left over after the blubber has been stripped away? The disposal is as grim and unceremonious as the rest of the process. Imagine the scene. The enormous, flensed carcass still floats alongside the ship, tethered by heavy ropes. It's a grotesque sight, pale flesh exposed where the blubber used to be, perhaps ragged chunks of meat still clinging to the massive skeleton, the water around it stained with blood and oil slicks. Sharks, drawn by the scent for days, likely still circle, tearing at the floating remnants. The smell of decay is beginning to intensify, adding another layer to the ship's already potent aroma. This mountain of rapidly putrefying flesh cannot simply be left tethered to the ship indefinitely. It's a hazard, attracting more sharks, potentially damaging the hull, and becoming increasingly offensive to the senses. It must be cast adrift. Heavy axes are sometimes used to sever the remaining tendons or connective tissues holding valuable parts like the jawbone for sperm whales, or baleen for right whales, if these haven't already been processed or secured. Then, the main carcass is cut loose. Feel the finality as the last ropes are severed or slipped. Watch as the immense pale form slowly drifts away from the ship, rolling sluggishly in the waves. It doesn't sink immediately. The remaining tissues and internal gases often keep it afloat for some time. It becomes a floating island of death, a macabre monument to the recent slaughter. This drifting carcass becomes a focal point for scavengers. Seabirds, albatrosses, petrels, gulls descend in screeching flocks, tearing at the exposed flesh. Sharks continue their feeding frenzy, ripping away huge chunks. Other predatory fish join in. It's a natural process, but witnessing it on such a grand scale is unsettling. You watch the carcass diminish, pulled apart, consumed by the ocean's cleanup crew, until finally, perhaps days later, the last remnants sink beneath the waves, leaving only a lingering oil slick and perhaps some scattered bones to mark its passing. Sometimes parts of the whale beyond the blubber were utilized, though often inefficiently or as a last resort. The meat, while generally considered too tough and oily for European palates, unlike in some indigenous whaling cultures, might occasionally be eaten by the crew out of desperation or for variety, likely boiled into an unappetizing stew in the ever-present cauldron. The tongue, in some whale species, was considered a delicacy by some, but harvesting it was just another messy job. For sperm whales, the massive lower jawbone, lined with valuable ivory teeth, was often hoisted aboard or lashed to the deck for later processing during lulls in the voyage. Cleaning and extracting these teeth was another unpleasant task, involving chipping away at the tough gum tissue. For baleen whales, like right whales or bowheads, the huge plates of baleen hanging from the upper jaw, used for filtering krill, were a primary target along with the blubber. These long, flexible plates, precursors to plastic, were valuable for corsets, umbrella ribs, springs, and other uses. Harvesting the baleen involved hacking away at the whale's upper jaw, another strenuous and bloody task, before the plates could be cleaned and bundled for storage. But the vast majority of the whale, the immense skeleton, the tons of muscle and organs, was simply waste, cast adrift to rot or be consumed. This disposal process, while necessary, underscores the brutal efficiency and inherent wastefulness of the industry. It's a stark reminder that this floating factory is focused solely on extracting one or two key commodities, leaving a trail of colossal refuse in its wake across the world's oceans. Watching the carcass drift away, you might feel a flicker of relief that the processing is over, but perhaps also a disquieting sense of the sheer scale of death required to fill those barrels below deck. While the general horrors of whaling remain constant, the specific environment drastically alters the nature of the suffering. Not all whaling took place in temperate or tropical waters. Some voyages, particularly those targeting the bowhead whale, prized for its immense baleen and thick blubber layer, ventured into the treacherous frozen landscapes of the Arctic. If your unfortunate fate led you to such a voyage, you faced a whole new dimension of misery and danger. Imagine sailing north, the familiar blue water gradually giving way to colder, greyer seas. The air develops a biting edge you haven't felt before. Then, the first signs of ice appear. Small chunks, known as growlers, bumping against the hull. Soon, you are navigating through increasingly dense fields of pack ice, vast white plains stretching to the horizon, broken by leads of open water. The ship groans and scrapes as it pushes through the ice or waits precariously for leads to open. The cold is relentless, penetrating, unlike anything experienced further south. Temperatures plummet far below freezing. Feel the bite of the wind on any exposed skin, instantly numbing. Your breath freezes in the air. Your coarse woolen clothing, even layered, feels inadequate against this profound chill. Frostbite becomes a daily, constant threat. Fingers, toes, ears, noses, they ache, then turn numb and white. You see crewmates with blackened, dead tissue on their extremities, the result of frostbite that might lead to agonizing loss of digits later, if infection doesn't set in first. Working on deck is torture. Ropes become stiff as iron bars, coated in ice, impossible to grip securely even with mittens, if you have them. Metal tools feel like burning cold against bare skin. The deck itself is a sheet of ice, making every step treacherous. Water spilled instantly freezes. Simply standing watch, exposed to the wind and cold for hours, is an exercise in endurance, pushing your body to its limits. The landscape itself is both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Towering icebergs, carved from glaciers, drift silently, capable of crushing your ship like an eggshell if you misjudge the currents or wind. The pack ice itself is constantly shifting, groaning, cracking with sounds like cannon fire. Leads can close suddenly, trapping the ship for days, weeks, or even months. The fear of being beset, frozen fast in the ice, unable to move, is paramount. If trapped over winter, survival chances plummet, as provisions dwindle and the relentless cold deepens. Hunting in these conditions is uniquely perilous. Launching whaleboats requires finding open water leads. Rowing means constantly pushing aside smaller ice floes. Capsizing in this freezing water is almost instantly fatal. Hypothermia sets in within minutes. Handling harpoon lines coated in ice is agonizing on the hands. The whales themselves, like the bowhead, are adapted to this environment. Powerful swimmers capable of disappearing beneath the ice floes, making the chase even more challenging and dangerous. Visibility is often poor. Snowstorms can reduce sight to zero in moments. The low sun creates long shadows and deceptive light. The phenomenon of ice blink, a white glare on the underside of clouds indicating ice fields beyond the horizon, or water sky, a dark reflection indicating open water, become vital navigational clues in this white wilderness. The psychological impact is immense. The stark, white, seemingly lifeless landscape feels alien, hostile. The silence, when the wind drops, can be profound, broken only by the eerie creaks and groans of the ice. The extended periods of darkness during the Arctic winter, or the perpetual daylight of summer, disrupt natural rhythms and add to the sense of disorientation. Isolation feels even more extreme here, at the frozen edge of the world. Scurvy remains a threat, perhaps even more so as opportunities for reprovisioning are scarce. The diet is monotonous, relying heavily on stored provisions. Contact with indigenous Arctic peoples might occur, offering chances for trade, perhaps for fresh meat, mitigating scurvy, but also potential conflict or the introduction of new diseases to vulnerable populations. Arctic whaling pushed the boundaries of human endurance. It added the horrors of extreme cold, the constant danger of ice, and an even more profound sense of isolation to the already brutal baseline of the whaling life. Surviving an Arctic voyage required exceptional resilience, luck, and tolerance for a level of suffering that seems almost unimaginable. While the blubber yielded the vast quantities of oil that fueled lamps and lubricated machinery, the sperm whale held another treasure, highly prized and uniquely dangerous to obtain: spermaceti. This waxy substance, found within the whale's enormous head, produced the finest, brightest burning candles and was valuable for ointments and cosmetics. But accessing this prize involved one of the most perilous and bizarre operations in the entire whaling process. The sperm whale's head is disproportionately large, making up perhaps a third of its body length. Within this massive structure lies the spermaceti organ, also known somewhat misleadingly as the case. This isn't the whale's brain, which is relatively small, but a complex reservoir filled with a mixture of spermaceti wax and oil. To get at it, the whale's head, often severed from the body or processed while still attached, had to be breached. Imagine the scene after the blubber stripping is complete. The colossal head, perhaps 20 feet long, is secured alongside the ship or partially hoisted onto the deck if possible. An opening must be cut into the top of the case. This requires men, armed with sharp-cutting spades, to climb onto the slippery, bloody head itself. Feel the precariousness of balancing on this rounded, unstable surface, slick with gore as you wield the heavy spade to chop through the tough outer layers. The real danger begins once the case is breached. A hole is cut, revealing the reservoir within. To extract the contents, one unlucky sailor, often the smallest or newest member of the crew, is lowered headfirst into the opening, armed with a bucket. Picture this. You are that man. You are being lowered into the dark, narrow cavity inside a dead whale's head. The smell is overpowering. A unique, slightly sweet but oily odor, mixed with blood and decaying tissue. The substance surrounding you is a semi-liquid slurry of wax and oil, surprisingly warm even hours after the whale's death due to its insulating properties. Feel the claustrophobia as you descend into the slick, narrow chamber. Your world shrinks to this greasy, dark cavity. Your job is to scoop the valuable mixture into the bucket, which is then hauled up to the deck to be emptied, and then lowered back down to you. It's repetitive, disorienting work in an environment that feels utterly alien and deeply unpleasant. There's a very real fear of slipping further, of becoming stuck, or even drowning in the oily mixture if the head shifts or takes on water. Meanwhile, on deck, the extracted mixture is processed. The spermaceti wax solidifies as it cools, separating from the thinner sperm oil. This wax is then barreled separately, representing the most valuable product, per gallon, of the entire whale. But the head contains more than just the case. Below it lies another reservoir called the junk, containing a honeycomb of connective tissue filled with a finer grade of oil and wax. Processing this often involved hoisting the entire head or large sections of it aboard, further chopping it into manageable pieces, and sometimes even squeezing the oil out using rudimentary presses or simply letting it drain. This entire operation, cutting into the head, bailing out the case, processing the junk, is fraught with risk, slipping with sharp tools, the danger of falling from the head, the sheer unpleasantness and potential hazards of being lowered into the case, and the difficulty of handling such immense, heavy sections of anatomy all contribute to the danger. It's a messy, hazardous, and frankly bizarre undertaking, driven solely by the high value of that peculiar, waxy substance. It perfectly encapsulates the lengths to which men would go and the risks they would endure to extract every last drop of profit from these marine giants, turning the whale's very brain case into another gruesome, dangerous workstation.